Hello, and welcome to a totally objective and not at all opinionated ranking of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook Weapons. My name is Justin, and... Anyway, as I was saying, this is a totally legit, 100% factual tier list of the weapons in the Player's Handbook, and today we're going to rank them fail through superb on this handy tier maker chart. Today, we're going to start at F for fail tier, and we have but one weapon. A weapon of such magnitude that we use it to catch butterflies. The net. Yeah, let's take the same thing that we used to catch fish to catch a frickin' monster with. You need crossbow expert just to throw it, because no matter what range you'll always have disadvantage, and the enemy will at worst be mildly annoyed at you for throwing a pile of tangled rope at it. F tier.
Fewer people want poop, some still will.
Next, let's move on to D tier weapons. D tier weapons are like the jib-jab of weapons. Some people use them because they're stuck in the literal medieval ages and forget that TikTok and Snapchat filters are a thing. Like, why use something that's objectively outdated when better things are out there? Let's take the whip for example. Oh, the whip. A reach finesse weapon that does 1d4 damage doesn't sound bad, until you realize that you can't do Indiana Jones type shit, and you need the dual wielder feat if you want to have one in both hands. So sadly, you can't live out your BDSM roleplay dreams until you suit up in leather armor and take a feat. Not that I know what that stuff looks like. D tier. Now the blowgun is big oof territory because it only deals 1 point of damage. I guess it's good for those who want to be Dwight Schrute or hunt small game animals on the road while traveling. This would be an F tier if it weren't for the one good use of a blowgun. Get yourself a rogue assassin, stuff blowgun in pants, tell guard you are just happy to see him, find a good hiding spot, and blow your target. Use the blowgun on your target. You still get your sneak attack damage, and you aren't suspected at all. If your DM is nice, maybe you'll even be able to use your poisoner's kit on it. D tier. Lances are a staple in cavalry, charging forward in open fields in formation and forcing the enemy to break ranks. In a game where half the name is Dungeons, a formational horse charge doesn't seem too viable. Plus, if you need 2 fucking feats to make the weapon work, polearm master and mountain combatant, maybe you shouldn't be using it. Yeah, a D12 is nice, but you know what else is nice? Not plugging up a whole dungeon corridor with your giant-ass horse and a long pointy stick. I guess if you're a halfling or a gnome riding your battle pug, you could make it work. But seriously, save your lances for only when you'll be outside, which may not be often. D tier. Light crossbows are there for people who want to play Daryl Dixon, except those people fail to realize the 150-pound draw weight on a compound bow is nothing compared to the 500-pound draw weight on the medieval light crossbow. To replicate this, the light crossbow has the loading property, meaning unless you invest in crossbow expert, when it comes to the zombie horde, you'll be less like Daryl and more like Mousy. D tier.
Is this good for the player? Is this good for the player? Is this good for the player?
C tier is like the fuckboy of weapon tiers. The only reason you go home with him is because you had too many hard seltzers and you lost your phone for an Uber home. You go home with him for 10% convenience and 90% pity. You use C tier weapons mostly out of pity, and if there's no better option, and you're ready to be fucked over. Let's take a look at the dart. What's better than giving a bunch of drunk people pointy things and have them throw it at a board? How about a bigger, sharp pointy thing the size of a fist? Sadly, unlike the darts that we can't use in America, that's right, the land of carrying 100 guns is totally legal, but carrying a lawn dart could get you in trouble. The dart in D&D 5e only does 1d4 damage, unless you're a monk and throw it at supersonic speeds. So if you really want to live your dream of playing lawn darts in a post-1988 America, these 5 copper piece weapons may be your best choice. C tier. When it comes to Morningstars, no historians can really agree what these things are. The Morningstar is like eating vegan meat. Like, yeah, I can eat it, but afterwards I feel like I hate myself. Morningstars are for people who choose not to use the longsword and use the Morningstar instead, and I bet they'll tell you within the first 30 seconds of meeting them as well. C tier. Now, the heavy crossbow is a little bit more up my alley and does a decent 1d10 damage. Yet since they have the loading property, firing it quickly without a feat makes it impossible, when you can just use a longbow and shoot twice. This isn't Skyrim, people. The draw weight of a 900-pound heavy crossbow isn't fun, so make sure your character is nice and strong. C tier. Javelins, in real life, take a lot of time to master throwing. I know, I failed in track doing it. It's a decent backup weapon you can throw decently far. Sadly, rules as written, javelins can't be used as a makeshift spear. Javelins are dangerous in both the right and the wrong hands. Just ask my track and field coach. Too bad they don't lock onto enemies like in video games. C tier. The sickle is the weapon of the field worker, good at hacking up sugarcane and mediocre at hacking up enemies in D&D. But hey, since you already have that Jack Skellington tattoo because you're so edgy, get your character a cloak and play an undying warlock or a long death monk and become death itself. That or dual wield with a light hammer and become a
communist.
C tier. Now, the war pick is an instrument of war that I can't quite figure out. Either the creators of the game are trying to create a horseman's pick, which is a weapon designed to tear mounted riders off their mounts, or they were going for the shepherd's axe, which doubles as a walking stick and used for herd defense in the Middle East. A one-handed D8 weapon isn't terrible, but since it's not versatile, you can't two-hand it. But damn, if you're in a dungeon and your casters conveniently forget that they have stone shape, this isn't a bad way to dig yourself out of that collapsed tunnel your barbarian left you. C tier. Now, this is the weapon for all you Peter, Paul, and Mary fans. A light hammer that will let you hammer all over this land. Whether throwing it or using it as a handheld weapon, causing mass genocide of Myconids has never been easier, and you can fix your broken down wagon, all with the same hammer. Of course, hand axes have the same properties and range, but do a d6 instead of a d4, firmly landing the light hammer in C tier. Now, the pike is one of the worst roads to drive on in Pennsylvania, because of all the toll... That makes more sense. The pike is a 30-foot-long anti-cavalry weapon, each army having a pissing contest with the "look, mine's bigger than yours" mentality, because foot units could poke each other too, and the longer the shaft, the bigger the thrust. Sadly, the pike in D&D was a victim of a bris gone wrong and had 2/3 of its shaft taken off. So now you have a heavy, two-handed weapon that sadly you still have to get into the swinging distance of a big-ass monster to use, when you could have just used a longsword instead. C tier. Don't even get me started on a reach weapon you have to swing to make work. At least with the pike you can poke and jab, but the glaive needs to be swung. Players who use the glaive are the Mac users of the D&D world. They don't mind paying the extra money for something that a cheaper product can do, and it's not compatible with half the shit you want to do with it. It's a heavy, two-handed weapon with reach, but swinging around a giant glaive in a dungeon corridor is like trying to turn a barge in a canal, or getting a Mac to run Steam games. C tier. I love the club! Oh, right, the weapon, not the dance floor. The club, one of the simplest designs in the history of weaponry. Ever get hit in the head by a club? You might turn out like well, let's just say that the club does more than the d4 damage it suggests in the game. It's a light weapon, so at least you can double the pleasure, double the club. Now, if you're a dick, you can recreate real-life scenarios and go to the Sea of Moving Ice and bop seals on the head for their pelts. Don't be shocked if the DM throws a white dragon at you for doing so, though. C tier. The halberd. Nothing too fancy with this weapon. It's a heavy reach weapon that's a big-ass pointy axe that does 1d10 slashing. Again, making it have to be swung. Hope your party knows how to duck. C tier. The sling is a weapon that's been used for centuries in warfare, and it's actually quite easy to learn. Hence why the ancient world deployed sling units in droves. David killed Goliath in the Old Testament with a sling. But you want to hear a secret? You're not David. You're not even bald Samson. The 1d4 sling you'll sling at the giant will be like a mosquito biting an elephant, but at least the mosquito lives in that scenario. However, it does make a good emergency underwear. C tier. Now let's be honest. The only reason you're using the Great Axe is because you forgot the Great Sword is in the game. With your luck on that d12, all you roll is 1s, even with the Savage Attacker feat. Come on, man. C tier. The flail is for those who like to play helicopter and have others clean up the bathroom floor when they're done. It does 1d8 bludgeoning, but isn't versatile. Like, What the hell? Also, flails weren't used that much in medieval time periods as we like to think. It's more of an early Renaissance thing. Now, I kinda helped write a textbook on medieval warfare, and flails weren't really a thing. C tier.
Nice.
So B tier is like the frickin' dad bod of weapon tiers. Like, you can make it work, but not everybody wants it. If you're lucky enough to find a build where the B tier weapons work, well, lucky you bastards. If only I could find a relationship like that. Anyway, take the rapier for example. You think of the Three Musketeers, but I think of Angelica Pickles. A single-handed finesse weapon that does 1d8 pokey damage. It's fun using it as a rogue or a bard, but a dual-wielding dex fighter is better off using the short swords unless they invest in the dual-wielding feat. It's definitely a top option for a rogue who doesn't want a weapon in the offhand. B tier. In the historical sense, the maul is a weapon of confusion. It's either a warhammer or a combination of the glaive and the pike, making it more like a halberd. Unlike the halberd, this two-handed reach weapon does 2d6 instead of 1d10 like the halberd does. Still tough to use in close quarters dungeons, but still a decent choice. Just watch out. We know what happens to mauls with two-handed weapons. B tier. Ah, the warhammer. It only costs 15 gold, which makes it the cheapest Warhammer product out there. Just like the money sink of a game, you'll either go all in and fully embrace it, using its versatile property to smash foes, or it'll be something half erased in the equipment section of your character sheet, long forgotten, like the Necron army in the back of my closet. B tier. Now the short bow is a weapon that many classes could use effectively. The lack of the loading property means that if you have more than one attacks per round, you can use all those attacks. Give the short bow to a rogue and the game suddenly becomes a game of Shadowrun. Nah bro, I'm the DM, bring your own d6s. B tier. No, not the gum, the trident the weapon. Yes, the trident the weapon is a decent throwable weapon that has the versatile trait. Hey, if your character just loves giving loads of exposition and not getting anywhere fast, use the trident. B tier. The hand crossbow is great for those who are looking for an offhand ranged weapon that isn't a throwable. It was really great in the early days of the game until wizards had the big brain idea to assume that I needed a free hand to load them to keep firing. So instead of looking like Neo, you look a little bit more like an idiot, because sadly it's not really an option anymore. It's kind of like your ex, still kind of fun to mess around with, but isn't really worth all your time. B tier. The Great Club is, well, great if you want to play Bam Bam. A simple weapon that does 1d8 damage is great for early level casters who aren't really proficient in martial weapons. Sadly, unless you grow a third arm or the DM forgets how casting works, you may need to take Warcaster to use this weapon effectively. B tier. If you're a cleric, the mace is basically A tier due to its iconic status. It only does a d6, but pair it with a shield and your big brain just got biggerer. B tier. The spear has been around for so many centuries and in so many cultures that it's hard to document who just was the first person to tie a pointy rock to the end of a long stick. It's a versatile weapon and can be thrown. It's the weapon that even killed Jesus. Like, Jesus. The spear was able to frickin' kill somebody who was half man, half god. Well, if you're a Trinitarian, that is. B tier. Rounding out B tier is the battle axe, which is just ever so slightly shy of A tier. A versatile weapon that does the same damage as a longsword. The only reason it's in B tier is because I'll always pick a longsword over the battle axe, even though they're basically the same thing. I don't know why. B tier.
Okay, now you have my attention.
A tier is like a dirty massage from your significant other. It feels so right to do, and you know you're going to end the session with a big smile on your face. Like, let's take a look at this long sword. The iconic big boy badass weapon. The long sword is what I see in my head when I'm thinking of a D&D fighter. Either one-handed or double fisting. You can use this weapon to effectively remind your enemies to stop living. A tier. The great sword. The big
Chongus.
The sword to end all swords. Ever want to play Cloud from Final Fantasy? How about just swing a large blade that is inconvenient to carry around? Want to do 2d6 instead of 1d12 like the plebs? A great sword is for you, my friend. A tier. The scimitar, or The Skimmy, for those with internet culture, are a great 1d6 finesse light weapon that makes you feel like a Turkish warlord with the desire to blind your nearest next of kin. Look it up. A tier. It's not how big it is, it's how you use it. Or at least that's what I keep telling myself. The short sword is a light finesse weapon that's a staple for any rogue or bard I play. The sad thing is that it's a martial weapon. Like, many untrained soldiers in ancient times used short swords, and I don't know why you couldn't just make it a simple weapon. Either way, A tier. Want to go on a hike with a walking stick? Want to use that walking stick to defend yourself? The quarterstaff is for you then, my friends. Sadly, it's not always effective in the untrained hands, but in the hands of someone important and actually who matters, you have a versatile weapon that is hidden in plain sight. A tier. Finally, for A tier, we have the hand axe. A light weapon that can be thrown and dual-wielded in the hands. It doesn't have the range of a javelin, but you can chuck 2 of these bad boys while you close in on your enemies, and you have 2 more, you can just pull them out and use them as melee weapons, or pick the ones up on the ground. It's pretty badass to see a dwarven axe thrower do her thing as she charges an enemy. A tier. So, by your brilliant minds of deduction, you have probably already figured out my super special S tier D&D 5e weapon. That's right.
The dagger.
Yes, the dagger. In a tavern and a fight breaks out and all you have is your steak knife? Well, now you have a dagger. Need to check for traps under a door sill but don't have proficiency in thieves' tools? Use a dagger combined with investigation. Need to cut up the game you just caught while you're out on the trail because you're out of rations? Use a dagger. Are you a spellcaster who didn't take Warcaster and needs to take down the troll before it heals itself?
The dagger.
Yes, even the big brain wizard who forgets all of his spells or ranged spell attacks can still stab the troll with a dagger, killing it before it regenerates. The dagger is a throwable weapon that can be used in many out-of-combat scenarios, like a doorstop or a makeshift python for your rope. Anyone can use this weapon, and it doesn't matter if you're a strength or a dex build. The dagger is the ultimate D&D 5e weapon. S tier. So yeah, these are like 100% unbiased, totally objective D&D Player's Handbook weapons ranked from worst to best. Make sure to leave us a comment below on how you're wrong for disagreeing with me. Remember, it's 2021 and my opinions count as facts now, okay? Thank you all very much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one, and always remember to game on. I hope people realize this is satire.